The Outlaws and the Hells Angels have had monumental battles over the years, a lot of life lost. These days, relations between most clubs seems to get worse. I've seen it with my own eyes. Today we talk about Mario the Wop Parente, who started off in the biggest outlaw motorcycle club in Canada at the time, the Satan's Choice MC, and the street politics that led him to patching over to the Big Four club, the Outlaws MC. Let's get into it. Mario the Wop Parente was born in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. His family were middle-class Italian immigrants. He grew up in the south end of Hamilton. Like most of the south ends in every major city, he saw a lot. It was nothing like the comforts of northern Hamilton. Parente worked as a construction worker, a welder, and a bouncer at some of the most well-known clubs and strip clubs in Hamilton. Being a bouncer, naturally, he would meet some of the toughest people on the streets. He would clash with drunks and a local crew called the Bullpen Hammer Boys. Being in the nightclub scene, you meet all the best kind of people. You know, like mobsters, pushers, and our favorite, Outlaw Motorcycle Club. So he quickly gravitated towards the local dominant club in his area, the Satan's Choice MC. In 1967, he joined the club and started his outlaw career. Parente stated in interviews his reason for joining was to be free, ride his bike, and being with a bunch of individuals that wanted to help each other out. Since Parente was of Italian descent, he went by the nickname the Wop. Most people in Canada at the time were of British descent, so since Parente was different, he always stood out. Being a member of the Satan's Choice MC, Parente would put in work to earn his respect. When you're new to the circle, men crave acceptance, and around these guys, you always want to be the toughest. Parente was only part of the Satan's Choice for a short time. He was convicted of assault on a police officer. One day, Parente saw a police officer beating a man that was handcuffed, and he could not just sit by and watch the man be battered, so he jumped in. By 1969, people understood exactly who Mario the Wop Parente was, and he was viewed by many as one of the most dangerous members of the Satan's Choice in his chapter. 1969, police raided the Satan's Choice Hamilton chapter clubhouse, and the Satan's Choice did not go down easy. They only were took down when backup showed up. In the 1970s, Parente rose to chapter president. He became good friends with Walter Stadnick. Stadnick really wanted to become a member of the Satan's Choice, but since Stadnick was 5'4", Mario the Wop felt he wasn't built for the life. He was just too small. So when Stadnick's name came at the table, Mario the Wop vetoed his own friend, so he went elsewhere. That would come back to bite him, to say the least. In 1976, the Satan's Choice national president, Bernie Ginden, was in prison for drug charges, so Garnett Mother McEwen took over as national president. Parente had a choice. What was he to do? He sat down, him and his brothers, and they all decided to patch over to the Outlaws MC. Being a member, he rode his bike everywhere and wore a lot of jewelry. Most people wore Harley Davidson and regular biker jewelry, not the Wop. He would always have jewels with the Outlaws logo on it. He was known for a piece that had the initials GLGC, the Good Looking Guys Club. It was a nickname the Outlaws went by at the time. He wanted you to know how proud he was of his club. His reputation had preceded him. He was a respected leader. 3 Hamilton men named Lord Blaquier, Michael Bierce, and Freddie Weiss had been looking to join the Satan's Choice MC. And since they patched over to the Outlaws, they could not join because they were black. So Weiss, Bierce, and Blaquier created the No Name Motorcycle Club, better known as the Not So Good Looking Guys Club. Parente and the Outlaws continued to associate with them. but they did not like the name. The no-name MC did not last long. They would go on to beat up a man and dump his body in the Hamilton River, so they were locked away and the club was disbanded. In December of 77, things would start to go downhill. A well-respected club in Montreal called the Popeyes Motorcycle Club decided to patch over and become the first Hells Angels chapter in Canada. Instant enemies. This is the reason why bikers are so quick to approach you over patches or diamonds or territories, and sometimes don't allow new clubs to start, because if your club grows and you meet the wrong rival and decide to patch over, all those members become your enemies. So on February 17th, 1978, popped off. It was on. The Outlaws versus the Hells Angels. A Hells Angel named Yves Apache Trudeau shot two outlaws and one of them died. In October 1978, Walter Stadnick, the one Parente felt at 5'4", wasn't built for the life, traveled to Montreal to contact Yves Buteau, the Hells Angels national president. Why? He wanted to patch in to the Hells Angels. Stadnick's plans were halted because of the Le Tourbillon massacre on October 12, 1979, when two of the outlaws went into Le Tourbillon bar to shoot the Angels and the Wild Ones MC members that were meeting there. One Angel, two Wild Ones died that night. 5 members in total of the Wild Ones would end up being killed by the Outlaws and they were disbanded. Stadnick ended up patching over to the Hells Angels and had dreams of expansion in Ontario. In July 1983, Yves Buteau, the Hells Angels national president, would establish the first Angels chapters outside of Quebec. Then he continued to expand. He sat down with the Satan's Angels MC, a strong club in the lower mainland of British Columbia on Vancouver Island, and they agreed and patched over to the Hells Angels. On July 17, 1983, two Montreal Hells Angels, Michael Jinx Jeunesse and Jean-Marc Nadeau, went on a bus to Vancouver wearing their club colors. As the bus was going through northern Ontario, Parente and the Outlaws happened to be riding their motorcycles and spotted the colors pressed against the windows of the bus. So he sent one of his brothers to follow the bus. Parente and the rest of them went to go get guns and got in a car. Infuriated that they would be in Ontario, Parente and the Outlaws proceeded to shoot up the bus in front of a Mr. Muggs coffee shop in Wawa. 3 people got hurt from shattered glass, but somehow no one was killed. As they sped off, 2 people spotted the bumper sticker that said "Support your local outlaws." Though no one was killed, the Angels understood what level the Outlaws were willing to take it to for Ontario. Later that day, police arrested Parente and fellow outlaws Roy Kaja and Ben Greco in the Outlaws clubhouse and charged them with attempted murder. Parente said he was not there, but witnesses put him at the scene of the crime. While waiting for trial for the Wawa shooting, Parente was arrested again for killing a man named Jimmy Lewis. Parente had worked at a strip club called Bannisters. It was owned by 2 cocaine dealers, Ronaldo Ticcarelli and Louis Aciroli. They used the club to launder money. The police were looking to shut them down by enforcing a bylaw that you can't serve liquor to anyone that comes in intoxicated. If they did, they would lose their liquor license. So Parente was strict about who he let in. Parente had words with the Lewis brothers, Tim, Brian, and Jimmy, several times. The Lewis brothers were known for extorting people and violence. On a 1984 night, Brian Lewis showed up to Bannisters drunk. Parente did not let him in, and it turned into an argument. After the club closed, Parente went to the Outlaws clubhouse. The 3 Lewis brothers and 5 friends went out looking for Parente. They went to the Outlaws clubhouse. When Parente saw them, he pulled out a shotgun in self-defense and shot and killed Jimmy Lewis. Parente was arrested later on that night. At his trial for the Wawa incident, Parente pled guilty to illegal possession of a firearm and was sentenced to 6 years in prison. He was shocked, but the judge gave him the max because he knew of the Lewis incident. Meanwhile, the Outlaws planned to kill Hell's Angel, Walter Stadnick, with a rocket launcher, but someone tipped the Hamilton police off before anything could happen. In 1988, Parente went to trial for Lewis' death and was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 30 months in prison. The Crown attorney wanted second-degree murder, but Parente's lawyer stated that he acted in self-defense. They came to the clubhouse to look for him, so it was legitimate. After Parente was released from prison, Brian Lewis confronted him over the death of his brother. Parente beat him up and kicked him out. Brian Lewis later on would kill himself by accident. He was at a party intoxicated, pointing a gun at his head, saying, "You want to know what I'm going to do to Mike the Wop?" And Lewis pulled the trigger, blew his own brains out. Tim, the other Lewis brother, died in a car accident. In November of '92, Parente's girlfriend, Linda DeMaria, was the target of an assassination attempt. The police believe that the bullets fired at her were meant for him. DeMaria was returning from a party with Parente and several other friends. She had just parked a car in the driveway of Parente's house at about 2 a.m. and was getting out the vehicle when she was shot once in the lower back. The bullet fired from a 9mm handgun struck just above her pelvis, and she was rushed to the hospital where her life was saved. In 1992, Parente was accused of laundering money for the mafia in connection with an Italian-born businessman, Vincino Jimmy DeMaria, but Parente and DeMaria were able to prove a legitimate source for their money. In June 1993, Stadnick and the other Hells Angels leaders hosted a party in Wasaga Beach, attended by the leaders of all the Ontario motorcycle clubs, except for the Outlaws and the Satan's Choice. In April 1996, the Ontario Provincial Police launched Project Charlie, a crackdown on the Outlaws, and a warrant was issued for Parente's arrest. Parente was arrested and was charged with conspiracy to sell cocaine and uttering death threats. As part of Project Charlie, 9 other members of the St. Catharines chapter were charged with various counts relating to narcotics, prostitution, and attempted murder. In July of 1996, Parente was attacked in the Hamilton Wentworth jail by an inmate just arrived from Montreal who poked him with a sharpened toothbrush. Parente fought him off and only had superficial injuries to his eyes and throat. Following the outlaw code, Parente refused to testify against him. Crown offered to drop the charges relating to the Project Charlie in exchange for him turning Crown's evidence. Parente rejected. In 1997, the Project Charlie charges against Parente were dropped when the Crown decided there wasn't enough evidence against Parente. In 1997, the Project Charlie charges against Parente were dropped when the Crown decided there wasn't enough evidence. Parente believes that he was only charged out of the hope that he might turn Crown's evidence. The hitman Kenneth Murdoch was hired by the Musitano brothers to kill 4 men. One of them was Parente. As far as it can be established, Murdoch never made the attempt against him. Parente rose up to become the national president of the Outlaws MC. Stadnick became the Hells Angels national president, focused on expansion, while Parente was only focused on Ontario. Parente was a traditional biker leader, a working-class tough guy, while Stadnick was a modern biker leader who was more like a CEO. Parente was the main reason why the Hells Angels had such difficulty becoming established in Ontario. In the summer of 2000, Stadnick made an offer to most of the Ontario outlaw motorcycle clubs that was too good for them to refuse. They could join the Hells Angels, patch for patch, allowing them to enter the Hells Angels with the same status that they had in their previous club. This was unheard of in the MC world. On December 29, 2000, in a much publicized ceremony, most of the Ontario outlaw biker clubs, such as the Satan's Choice, the Vagabonds, the Lobos, the Last Chance, the Paradise Riders, and some of the loners traveled to the Hells Angels Mother Chapter Clubhouse in Sorel, just south of Montreal, to join the Hells Angels, making them at one stroke the dominant outlaw biker club in Ontario. On that day, dozens of charter buses from Ontario arrived at the Angels Clubhouse, carrying the bikers. Even some outlaws, such as David the Hammer McDonald of the Hamilton chapter and Sean Cheeks Bashaw of the London chapter, went over to the Hells Angels. Parente called James Frank Wheeler the president of the American Outlaws, who in turn contacted Ralph Sonny Barger, the leader of the American Hells Angels. Barger ordered Stadnick to stop trying to recruit outlaws in exchange for a promise that there would be no more biker war in Ontario. At the Toronto exhibition grounds, both Isner and Parente found themselves surrounded by Hell's Angels, leading to Parente to joke to Isner, "You're probably going to want to stick with us for a little while." On September 25th, 2002, the OPP launched Project Retire, an operation intended to end the Outlaws once and for all in Ontario. As part of the Project Retire raids, the police seized 5 stolen motorcycles, 1 stolen truck, 44 guns, drugs worth about $1.6 million, and 5 outlaw clubhouses. All 58 outlaws in Ontario were arrested. Elizabeth McGuire, the Crown Attorney prosecuting Parente, met twice in private with Justin John Getliff before Parente's preliminary hearing, the Canadian equivalent to the grand jury, where she gained the impression that Getliff intended to convict Parente and declare the Outlaws a criminal organization. On June 30th, 2004, Getliff dismissed the charges against Parente, saying that the Crown had failed to present enough evidence. In response, McGuire chose to engage in a rare legal maneuver of preferring an indictment, asking the Attorney General to reinstate the charges against Parente. The Crown frequently offered Parente a plea bargain under which they would drop the charges against him if he were to confess to being a member of a criminal organization. That offer Parente always rejected. On June 25, Pikinski filed an abuse of process motion against McGuire, arguing that her private meetings with Getliff were illegal. At the hearing, Justice Linda Templeton ruled in favor of Parente. Parente had an ongoing lawsuit against McGuire, alleging malicious prosecution. Parente was held in jail but released on $400,000 bail in 2004. After the preferred indictment came through, Parente went back to jail. In 2005, he was again released on $400,000 bail. He had to live by sundown curfew, and even though he lived in Hamilton, had to visit the London police station 3 times a week to ensure he was obeying the bail conditions. Parente's girlfriend, Nadia Costa, and her friend Silvana DiMartino lost their security clearances at the Pearson Airport in Toronto, meaning that they were in effect fired from their jobs as passenger information representatives. Costa lost her security clearance because she posted bail for Parente, leading to the airport to declare her a person of bad character. DiMartino lost her security clearance because she was caught with a deck of playing cards with the logo that said "Support your local outlaws." After a series of lengthy appeals, both Costa and DiMartino regained their security clearances and their jobs. Parente paid his legal bills out of his own pocket and that of Costa, being forced to sell almost everything he owned. Parente maintains that the Outlaws is just a motorcycle club that has criminals as members, but is not a criminal organization. In March 2009, Alex Smith, the Crown Attorney prosecuting Parente's case, dropped all 17 weapons and drug charges against him, saying there was no reasonable prospect of a conviction if the case should go to trial. In 2009, Parente sued the Crown to seek the return of his confiscated assets, which the Crown refused to do under the grounds that Parente was a member of a criminal organization. The Crown's argument was that even though the charges against Parente were dropped, because other outlaws confessed to being members of a criminal organization, that his assets were still forfeited to the Crown. In an interview with the Toronto Star published in 2009, in the same interview, he announced his resignation as Outlaws national president. Parente concluded the interview by saying he was now intending to work as a construction contractor. Parente was replaced as the Outlaws national president by Richard Duca Williams.